Hey, what's up? If you're new here, welcome. My name is Marvin. I'm a tech YouTuber, and I've been reviewing all sorts of tech for a while now, from peripherals to smartphones, laptops, monitors, and anything you can think of relating to technology. However, I recently decided to go back to my roots and explore photography again, so here we are reviewing a macro lens. A lens that came in the most perfect timing since I'm on a hunt for a proper macro lens, and this one, I'm telling you, is legit. A near perfect macro lens, and I absolutely love it. I'm talking about the new Tamron 90mm F2.8 Di3 Macro VXD. Tamron has been producing amazing macro lenses for about 45 years now, but the last one they released before this was back in 2016, so this is definitely highly anticipated, especially for mirrorless cameras. I've been using this for about 2 weeks now, and like I said, in my honest opinion, this is a near perfect macro lens and probably one of the best, if not the best option we have right now when it comes to autofocus macro lens. The autofocus on this one is absolutely impressive, making it a versatile mid-telephoto lens as well for normal shooting and for portraits. And coincidentally, we also have here in the studio the awesome Sony 90mm F2.8 macro lens, so we're also going to do some sort of comparison between the two. So without further ado, let's talk about the Tamron 90mm F2.8 macro. Let's get into it. As always, honest disclaimer, this video is not sponsored or paid. In fact, I just borrowed this from Tamron Philippines. They will not see this video or my script prior to release. But yeah, after playing with it for a while, I'm definitely ready to grab this lens as soon as it becomes available in the market. Now, the unboxing experience is pretty straightforward. We have a familiar white box here with some details around it. What we have here is for Sony E mount, but this is also available for Nikon Z mount. Inside the box, we have the user manual and the lens itself properly protected by a couple of cardboards and a sort of plastic protection. At first look and touch, it might seem massive, but in fact, it's only because of the huge lens hood, which by the way, has a very nifty feature. It has a sort of window so that you can still adjust your variable ND or circular polarizer filters, which is a clever idea. The lens itself is relatively compact and lightweight. It only weighs around 630 grams, and the build quality is what you would expect from any modern Tamron lenses made out of durable but sleek-looking polycarbonate plastic, not to mention weather sealed as well. I really appreciate the vision of Tamron keeping their lenses compact and lightweight, albeit with some sacrifices in features. Speaking of features, looking around, we have a couple of physical switches and buttons here. We have a focus limiter switch that allows you to limit the focusing range depending on your shooting scenario. This is especially useful for close range autofocus so that it won't hunt all the way through the full range. We also have a focus set button here that you can customize via the Tamron Lens utility, which is available for PC and Mac and Android. Most modern Tamron lenses have a very convenient USB Type-C port, which you can use to connect the lens to your computer and take advantage of the Tamron Lens utility. Inside the utility, you can customize the focus set button to any of these functions. I prefer to set the function from the camera itself. Now you can also change the manual focus ring rotation here and change the manual focus method to either linear or non-linear, which is pretty nifty. And of course, update your lens firmware version. Now the focus ring I would say is fairly smooth and just the right size for precise focusing. And what I like about most modern Tamron lenses is the fact that they all have a 67mm filter thread, which means you can save a lot of money by getting a single and smaller 67mm filter for all of your Tamron lenses. I have here the Tamron 90mm, the 28-75mm G2, and my most recent purchase, the Tamron 20-40mm, which by the way, I'm also planning on sharing with you my experience, so make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that. Now, filters, especially the good ones, are quite expensive, so having a unified filter thread is definitely appreciated. But as I alluded to earlier, it lacks some features that its competitors have. Putting it side by side the Sony 90mm F2.8 macro lens, they are not far from each other in terms of size and weight. In fact, the Sony is slightly lighter at 598 grams. Now, the Sony 90mm lens also has a built-in stabilizer and a handy autofocus/manual focus switch, which is clutch for close distance focusing without the need to get your eyes off the subject. I wish the new Tamron 90mm would at least have a dedicated autofocus/manual focus switch, but if you consider its price, which is only around 42,990 Philippine pesos, I cannot complain, especially the fact that it's 10,000 Philippine pesos cheaper than the Sony 90mm. I was actually ready to purchase the Sony 90mm after borrowing one from a friend, but the timing of the release of the new Tamron 90mm couldn't be more perfect. The Sony 90mm is pretty awesome. It's razor sharp, lightweight, fast, and has a lot of physical switches, but the price difference is something that I cannot simply ignore. So yeah. Now let's move on to the Tamron 90mm's optical characteristics. It is actually Tamron's first lens that features a 12-blade circular aperture, resulting in pleasant and near-perfect circular bokeh when wide open, and stepping it down to f16 results in equally pleasing 12 long sun rays or sun stars. Lens flares without the hood are present but are fairly minimal and have a relatively pleasant appearance as well as the light source goes across the lens. I also like the fact that typical and longitudinal chromatic aberration is pretty much non-existent with this lens, resulting in clean-looking close-up shots, perfect for weddings, debuts, events, and similar applications. Now let's talk about sharpness, distortion, and vignetting as we head into our lens chart segment here with a direct comparison against the Sony 90mm. Just a disclaimer though, I just printed out this chart and honestly it's not the sharpest sample ever, so please bear with this. But I'll share with you real-world sample photos later to better gauge the image quality of this lens, and I'm also planning on getting a proper lens chart in the future. With that said, on the left side we have the Sony 90mm and on the right side we have the new Tamron 90mm. At the center, wide open at f2.8, as you can tell, both are tack sharp and pretty much neck and neck with each other. But if we take a look at the corners, the Tamron is noticeably better, both in terms of sharpness and contrast. Stopping down to f4, both get a noticeable improvement, but the Tamron is still better in terms of corner sharpness and contrast. Now, at f5.6, both are essentially perfect at this point, sharp and contrasty. I can even give Sony a slight edge here when it comes to contrast, but not that significant to be honest. Corner contrast has improved on the Sony, but I'll still give a slight edge on the Tamron in terms of sharpness. At f8, it's now hard to tell which is better, to be perfectly honest with you. Both are extremely sharp and contrasty at this point. Same thing in the corners with a slightly better contrast for the Sony. And lastly, at f16, both suffer from diffraction, which starts at around f10 and f11, but is still pretty good, especially if you need a larger plane of focus when shooting macro, let's say a flower or an insect. This is quite important and both lenses passed my eye test. The Sony is still better in terms of corner contrast though. Now in terms of distortion in vignetting, this is where the Tamron 90mm is significantly better. As you can tell at wide open, the Tamron 90mm has minimal vignetting and pretty much no distortion. The Sony also has no perceivable distortion but has noticeable vignetting at wide open. Stopping down to f4, the Sony improves significantly, but the Tamron is now almost perfect in terms of vignetting or the lack thereof. At f5.6, the Tamron is still noticeably better, but at this point, both look pretty good already. Now going back to real-world application, what I like the most about the Tamron 90mm, aside from the things I've already mentioned, is its autofocus performance. If there's anything that macro lenses are known for, is that more often than not, they are not as good as normal lenses when it comes to autofocus. They tend to be slow and frequently hunt. But the new Tamron 90mm is far from that. As you can tell, the autofocus is fast throughout the entire focusing range. And like I said earlier, it has a focus limiter switch to make it even faster depending on your shooting scenario. Mind you, these two subjects are around 3.5 feet from each other. Now, eye autofocus tracking is also quite fast and it's even comparable, if not better, to the native Sony lens. But the most notable thing here is that it is extremely quiet compared to the Sony, which has this high-pitched autofocus sound that is quite audible. So based on this comparison, I have more reason and justification to get the Tamron 90mm over the Sony 90mm. Again, please don't get me wrong, the Sony 90mm is awesome with a lot more features to offer, but optically and practically speaking, the Tamron in my honest opinion is better overall. Now before I share with you my final thoughts, let's take a look at more sample photos so that you can have a bit of an idea of what kind of shots and shooting scenarios that you can do with the Tamron 90mm f2.8 macro lens. First is of course for shooting macro subjects like small plants and insects. And although you can definitely use this in autofocus mode, I usually just set it to the minimal focusing distance to get that 1:1 ratio, which by the way is around 9 inches. And don't be confused, the minimum focusing distance on the spec sheet is actually the distance between the subject and the sensor, not the distance between the subject and the front of the lens. And as per my own measurement, you can get as close as around 3.3 inches to your subject with this lens. Now, a true macro lens should have a magnification ratio of 1:1 or greater, which is enough for most macro photography applications, but definitely not enough for extreme insect macro photography, which is why some people, including me, still want to add an attachment like an extension tube, or in my case, a Raynox DCR250 magnification lens to be able to get closer to the subject and get better images like this. But even with the Tamron 90mm F2.8 alone, as you can tell, it can definitely take some awesome macro shots. Now, as of the moment, my setup includes a Godox TT350S compact flash to be able to use this macro lens handheld, because without that, you'll need a tripod or a monopod. Another application of a macro lens is what I alluded to earlier, close-up shots of valuable things like wedding rings, watches, and accessories for events. And of course, for shooting still life just for the fun of it, like simple things around the household. You can even explore macro flash photography, like this water droplet coming out of our air conditioning drain. The imagination is endless with macro photography, which makes it interesting and challenging. And lastly, with an outstanding autofocus motor, you can definitely use this for portrait photography, may it be for family and friends or for events. And while it's not as wide as most dedicated prime portrait lenses like an 85mm f1.8, it can still produce pleasing portraits with creamy bokeh. And since it doesn't have any distortion with a longer focal length, it highlights the pleasing characteristics of your subject. Overall, to conclude, I am 90% decided to get this lens. The only thing that's preventing me from getting one is of course the budget, since I just recently purchased a Tamron 20-40mm f2.8, which by the way is almost similar in price. But yeah, like I said, the new Tamron 90mm f2.8 is a near-perfect macro lens that is worth picking up if you're into macro photography and portraits. I actually wanted to get an 85mm f1.8 for portraits, but with this, I get the best of both worlds. This lens has decent build quality, has a decent amount of physical switches and buttons, features a fast autofocus system, and is optically immaculate. There's nothing else I can ask for, especially considering the price. By the way, this is actually my first proper lens review, so please bear with me. If you have any constructive criticisms or room for improvement, please don't hesitate to leave them below because I'm planning to do more of this. And there you have it guys, thank you for watching. Huge thanks to Tamron Philippines for lending me this lens. I've already bought 2 lenses from them this past couple of years, and I might get another one soon. If you're interested in getting this lens, I'll put some links below. Now, if you're looking for a super compact pancake lens, make sure to watch my review of the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 FE by clicking this. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you appreciate this video, and see you next time. Have a great day guys, you're awesome.